Hello, everyone, and welcome to this training with This Dot. I am your host, Tom Van Antwerp, and I'm pleased today to welcome Kathleen McMahon, who's going to be talking to us about digital gardening with Astro and MDX. Kathleen, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me, and I am very excited to be here. So, as y'all know, I'm Kathleen McMahon, and I am very excited to talk to y'all about my presentation, Bye Bye Weeds, Digital Gardening with Astro and MDX. So before we begin, let me get a few things out of the way. So first, I want to give a huge thank you to the This Dot team for inviting me to speak on the JS Drops series. And my presentation will be posted on Noticed, that's https://noti.st/resource11 after my talk. I'll also post the full URL on Twitter sometime after this presentation is released. You can follow me at resource11 on Twitter, GitHub, and Instagram. And let me introduce myself a little bit better for you. I am an engineer, designer, and I like to speak about things. And I'm an occasional cyclocross racer, mostly in costume. I am known for being in the back of the pack, wearing my costumes backwards, keeping everyone entertained while they toast me with their beverages, and keeping a little bit of a little Bluetooth speaker in my back pocket so everyone can have some tunes as I am the class clown of the race series. I am a lover of lights. I love to go to the beach and collect sand dollars. It's literally the Where's Waldo of the ocean. And I love my cats Thor and Otis. And I collect a ridiculous amount of crystals, which I did since the beginning of COVID. And I've tried to photograph them, but Otis interferes often with my photography with opinions on where I should place my attention. So thanks, Otis. And now Thor has learned to do the same with my attempts at photographing my sand dollar collection. Thor is very satisfied with himself. But who can resist my boys? They are adorable. Now, I've worked on a few design systems like the O'Reilly Media Design System, Launch Darkleys, and Northwestern Mutuals. And I love design systems. It's very exciting work, especially if you like herding kittens. It's always fun with a lot of moving parts. And part of design system work includes trying out different software stacks and choosing the best tools for your system, like Gatsby and MDX, for example. Now, speaking of Gatsby and MDX, they are what I initially chose to build my digital garden site. Now, this is my digital garden site, kathleenmcmahon.dev, back in 2020 when I first built it. And you might ask, a digital what? What is a digital garden anyway? Well, this blog post by Joel Hooks, who is the creator of Egghead, the egghead.io, that website that makes all those lessons you can learn about coding. He has this article and this phrase on his website has a phrase that makes sense to me. His blog is a digital garden, not a blog. And what makes a garden is interesting. It's personal. Things are organized and orderly, but with a touch of chaos around the edges. Now, that spoke to me. And I latched on that idea of creating a digital garden and using Gatsby and MDX as my stack for my personal digital garden for a few reasons. One, because I tend to love doing all the things, all the time, using all the latest software. But at the same time, I struggle with making progress over seeking perfection. And if I'm not careful, I can lean towards making big Lexus bows versus tiny kitten bows. So perfection is the enemy of done. So wow, I can hyper focus on the details, making that perfectly crafted piece of software before shipping. So that is really can be hack on velocity. So the digital garden format can really keep me focused on that tiny kitten bow mindset. This way, progress happens, blog posts get written, and new things get shipped. So fast forward a few years, a few top listings and package updates later, and I noticed that my digital garden got weedy. And I looked at my site, and I also looked at the Gatsby site, and I noticed that Gatsby had versioned up to version 5.3, and my site was still on version 2.3. So whoops. And I consulted a colleague in the industry who was familiar with Gatsby and asked how painful this upgrade would be. And of course, I already knew the answer. Upgrading 3 major versions. Ouch. But asking the question and hearing the expected, yes, it'll be a pain. The advice leaned towards the obvious. If it's using JavaScript, it requires regular maintenance. Okay, but it turned into a suggestion to use Squarespace, since Squarespace doesn't require regular maintenance. And that kind of sounded like JavaScript's hard, and maybe you're out of your league. And maybe you, Kathleen, should build a Squarespace site. And that said to me, did you just say something was hard? Hello, spike-driven development. By golly, I would upgrade this app 3 versions up. Squarespace my butt. So 10 hours later, still shaking my head about that Squarespace recommendation. 10 hours later, after a Netflix binge and upgrade session, I come up for air. I have fixed all the new GraphQL changes and was wrestling with the new Gatsby image API changes. And I was questioning life choices. I admit it was just like this image, combining cello and shellfish. And I figured deciding to go all in was maybe not a great decision. I thought to myself, I have a 4-page site. Why am I using a JavaScript framework to render 4 static pages in a blog? And why am I using JSX to create HTML when I could just use HTML? Granted, I work on design systems. I love creating component APIs. And I love using React. So I'm the last person to say, just throw it all out. But there are times when you need to create just a 4-page site without throwing all this JavaScript at it, just to render something that's small, lean, performant, and it just doesn't need to be a single-page app. It just needs to be a multi-page app. And the Gatsby of 2020 isn't the same as it is today. That hot static site generator everyone wanted to use of 2020 has evolved into something different. It's evolved into this suite of industrial farming equipment. And I don't need this. I don't need this suite of combine machines when a hoe and a rake will do for my needs. So it was time to weed out the complexity and choose a new framework, one that will compile right down to HTML and CSS and serve the minimal amount of JavaScript when I need it. So I looked around, and because there are a bunch of options out there, oh, hi, Astro, let's take a look at you. So I chose Astro. Why? Well, there are things like, okay, it supports other libraries like, oh, if I wanted to, I could pull in Solid if I wanted to. It's also content focused. It's designed for building content-rich websites. Going back one more time. So I looked around, and because there are a bunch of options out there, I landed on, oh wait, I landed on this, Astro. Let's take a look at you. So why Astro? Well, first, it's content focused. It's designed for building content-rich websites. And I zeroed in on, oh wait, blogs and portfolios. I don't need a logged in dashboard. I don't need a complex native app interactions that Next.js would give me. So this seems like a safe bet for what I need right now for a page site. Okay, it has MDX support, and I'm using MDX, so I can add MDX to my pages and move on. It supports post CSS by default, and I'm using post CSS, so my current CSS setup will port over without much fuss. Oh, it has Astro Islands. This means that there are interactive UI components on the page that render in isolation using partial or selective hydration. So I can import my components from my Gatsby project, and I can choose to convert my components to Astro over time or leave them as a React component. I can pick and choose this, which is pretty cool. Also, I can try out different frameworks in Astro as I want, like Solid, like Vue, without fully committing to one framework. And I can share state between them, which is really, really cool. And also, Astro uses MPA and server-side rendering versus a client-side single-page app. So it's very performant. And the configs are so much leaner than Gatsby. Check this out. Okay, so this is Gatsby's project config on the left versus Astro's project config on the right. Okay. In the Astro config on the right, we have the Slight Deploy URL Markdown integrations, image and build configs, all in a small list. And the Gatsby config has all these post CSS imports, configs, site metadata, plugins, more plugins, more plugins to resolve, and the config keeps going and going and going and going. And now, along with that, notice the Astro config is still just one file, But now we've moved over to the Gatsby node file, which we need that node file because I didn't want to have my blog post under the source file folder in Gatsby, because I wanted my blog post in a separate folder in Gatsby because I wanted to show that I'm really fancy and smart. So I had this Gatsby node file to create pages, to create nodes. You have your slugs and everything else over in that node file, and add all this unnecessary complexity to create all these nodes, GraphQL queries to make absolute paths to create the post. Woohoo! And a Gatsby browser file with this wrap root element, so I could wrap style components, pass them into the MDX files all at once for usage. So wow, look at all that complexity versus that one file in Astro. Whew. Now, once I ported my components over to an Astro project, there were some differences now that I'm tilling the soil. I moved from React Children to Astro slots. Those are the differences. So in the Gatsby file, we have a layout.js file. In Astro, we have a layout Astro file on the right. In the Gatsby layout.js file, we import React components, CSS module files, an MDX embed provider, and a use extra classes utility function. And the layout Astro file, the components are now Astro components, and we use a CSS file. In the Gatsby layout, we're using class names and the use extra classes utility for style concatenation. In the Gatsby layout, we use children prop. In the Astro layout, we use slot. And that's how we convert. So it's fairly straightforward. Now that we've converted our layouts, we mulch our content. So first, we can ditch our GraphQL queries and move them over to content collections. This is fantastic because content collections are great for organizing content. You can validate your front matter and provide automatic type safety for all your content. In Gatsby, I had this one query to grab images from a local folder in my repo to grab images to render on my homepage. Literally one query for 6 images. This other one to grab images for my about page, queries for my right page, and a query for all my MDX posts, and a query for my MDX posts to parse all the data into a readable format. That is a lot of queries for a 4-page site. That's a lot of complexity. In comparison, Astro's content collections added in, this feature was added in Astro version 2. It's much simpler in comparison. This content collection allows you to organize your documents, validate your front matter, and provide a type safety in a content schema. So rather than GraphQL queries, we are adding type safe schemas for blog collections, for your speaking lists and your blog lists in this config, in one config file. It's pretty lean. So along with content collections, you can dynamically generate your routes in Astro by creating a slug Astro file and use the get collection function from the Astro content API, and use get static paths functions to parse your data and pop it into your page's post directory. So for example, the get collection function will grab your blog data, you combine it with your get static paths functions, and it will map your data for each of your posts. So now there's no more finagling your post files, no more Gatsby create page nonsense in your Gatsby node file. Everything is just pulled into this slug Astro file, and then you can pull everything into this one slug Astro file. It's a lot more straightforward for you. The other great thing about content collections is you can add type safety in your markdown in your MDX files using Zod. Now, what is Zod, you may ask? So the official definition of Zod is it is a TypeScript first schema validation with static type inference. What that means is Zod uses TypeScript to create schemas to help you validate your data. So that's pretty nice. Now, once your content is defined and validated, you can plant new starters. And you can pull in some images like so, using the images API that Astro has provided for you. So this image assets API has been released, and it's been stable as of Astro version 3. So it's been around for a while. And this API allows you to import any image from the source/assets directory. And when you pop it into that, if you add an image into the source attribute and add the required alt attribute in there, which is, I love that guardrail for this. So once you use this pattern as defined on the screen here, it's image API, pop in the source in your attribute, add your required alt attribute for your image description. This is what renders for you in the DOM. You will get an optimized image as WebP format. You will get the width and the height will be rendered for you. You will get async decoding, your lazy loading, and your image description. So the image is optimized and your proper attributes are added into your image tag, and everything is enforced for you in your image output. That is very cool. Now, some of the challenges that I went through in my site conversion from Gatsby to Astro were converting some of my components, because since I am a design engineer, I tend to design my components as in terms of reusable components. So some of the composable nature of my components, I ran into some challenges of thinking in terms of Astro versus thinking in terms of React and how React and Astro work together. And so it was a bit time consuming. For example, links and links that are paired with icons. For example, in this example is converting Gatsby links to Astro links that are paired with icons. That include React font awesome and Astro iconify. So what I mean by this is, on the left was my link component. On the right is on the left is the before, which is the link, my link component that also has a support for an icon. So a link with an icon. On the right is an Astro version of a link with an icon. Now, my original component supported React Font Awesome. And the reason I use this is because React Font Awesome uses SVG icons, which have accessibility support. And when I was trying to convert this link and use this within and I was trying to convert it into an Astro format, I ran into a bunch of challenges because of the nature of how Gatsby links were not very compatible in Astro, and also mixing Astro components and nesting React components inside Astro files was not working well for me. So I was stuck on this pattern for a week. So in the end, how I solved this was removing the Gatsby link, refactoring the links to be Astro links, which was just a standard link, and ripping out the React font awesome and using Astro Iconify, which allowed me to, if you look at the some of the code here, it allowed me to get rid of a lot of the conflicting nature of mixing React components with Astro components. Also allowed me to keep all Astro components into the same Astro file of the link Astro file. So we have native HTML components, native SVG files, but also maintaining the accessibility of Astro Iconify icons in here. If you notice to the left and the right, we still have accessible icons, accessible links, returning a link on the left and the link on the right. However, we also still have our extra classes, we still have our slots, but we also don't have a breaking file where we're not mixing nested React components inside an Astro file, which does not work. So it was a really tough problem, which is why it's making me go into my head a little bit. But bottom line is, don't nest React children into your Astro components or chaos happens.
Before we get back to our conversation, we wanted to say thank you to This.Labs, who is the sponsor of today's show. If you need help with a project that has failed to deliver on time, or are in need of a team that feels true ownership over your engineering projects, definitely hit up This.Labs. They specialize in helping business leaders ensure their strategic digital initiatives stay on track. Trusted by companies like PlayStation, Capital One, Herman Miller, PayPal, and T-Mobile, you can find them at this.co. That's THISDOT.co. Now, let's return to our show.
But what I've learned from converting my site to Astro, there is tension between big Lexus bows versus tiny kitten bows when you migrate anything, but especially when I migrated my site to Astro. Schemas can be tricky, and dynamic imports with images also can be tricky. CSS load order is no joke, and I'm going to show you this in a demo. I ran into some issues with transitions, where if I messed up my CSS load order, my CSS would shift during my playing with the new view transition API. So I'm going to talk about that during the demo. And clean up any extra file cruft, any unnecessary files that you are not using, or your Netlify builds and deploys will fail, because Netlify doesn't know what to do with any unnecessary files. So make sure that you are cleaning up any like unnecessary code that you do not need. When I first started building and converting this site from Gatsby to Astro, I was starting right when the image API was coming in and the view transitions was just being released before it was stable. And they were pretty buggy in Astro version 3.0.12. So I was running into some issues with using the back arrow. And the team has done some really hard work to make everything pretty fantastic. So the view transitions API is very stable in the current version of Astro, which I am very excited to see, and I love all the things that you can do currently with the view transitions in Astro now, even just for native transitions, and especially the things you can do with the persistent state. So if you are transitioning not just between pages, if you are transitioning content, if you want to have videos transition, if you want to transition between one view to another and have like a video or something else persist on the page, that is one really great factor for having the view transition API in Astro, especially now that the view transition CSS feature is starting to drop in browsers, which means that you can start doing view transitions in CSS, which is pretty cool. There is still a use for the view transition API that Astro provides for things like persisting state across views. So still keep a lookout for the view transition API in Astro. So now I'm going to give you a quick demo before I wrap this up. So let me do that. Let me see what I can do right now. Come on, mouse, stay with us. Okay. So here is my demo. My demo is this. So this is my deployed site. In Gatsby. And let me get so this is my deployed site in Gatsby. Let's make sure it opens. And this is my deployed site. Hooray. One. And this is my deployed site. This is my deployed site. So Gatsby on the left, my deployed site in Astro. So just about a one-to-one representation. You see a little bit of hesitation there. Still a little bit of still some CSS changes here. So I'm still working through some of my CSS changes. Going through there. So almost a one-to-one. See, look at certain things have not ported over. So I'm working through some of the CSS nuances that have changed through my. So I have not changed any of the CSS, but some of the things in the CSS are not fully sticking yet. And I am double checking what has happened with some of the CSS and the specificity that has, these are the things that I'm noticing about converting from Gatsby to Astro, is that there are some subtle differences into how the CSS renders. And this is possibly more of an architecture decision on the user end versus how Gatsby renders things. But it also could be how Gatsby also adds in their slots to their architecture. So there could be a blend of how I've architected my CSS using Andy Bell and Hayden Pickering's every layout techniques for generic layouts for my sites, along with some other overrides in combination with how Astro uses their slots in Astro Islands architecture. So there are some nuances that are going on. But as you can see, in general, just about everything is a one-to-one mapping, which is awesome, right? Cool. But now look at this other nuance. So I'm going to move this over 1, 2, because everything's responsive. And let's bring over the deployed site, because who doesn't want a deployed site? Here comes the deployed site. So here, this is the deployed site. And I want to show you, look at what's funky with the deployed site. Right there, notice that? In the deployed site, there is some extra styles that are being added right here. And we're gonna do this. So in the deployed site, I'm gonna make it a lot larger because one, we're streaming, and 2, let's be kind to everyone that is relying on vision, on reading this screen. So let's make this a lot bigger. In this deployed site, this home H1 site, in the styles, there is this slug class that I have not defined that is being, there are these new classes that are being added that are the slug class from the generic slug page that we defined as that generic content collections page has this CSS style with margins, which is being overridden. But then we also have this targeted CSS file that is overriding that. So we're having some specificity issues that are overriding my styles, okay? And I've been chasing this bug for a bit. And this is my suspected, this is what I suspect is the issue, is that Astro Islands and Astro Slots possibly are causing issues in anything that uses OWL selectors anything that uses OWL selectors, I do not use this term because it's a problematic term. OWL selectors that are used to style sibling styles, to create some sibling styles in your CSS, to create some nice generic content like this, can be problematic, apparently, in deployed Astro sites, because it's somehow attaching styles to my CSS that I do not expect, because it's adding some styles in our islands and slots. So I am exploring how to add an override using the where selector and targeting the Astro island and Astro slots selector to see if this will solve the problem where I will not have my margin collapsing here in my deployed site where everything works in my local site. So this is one of the styling frustrations that I am encountering in my deployed site that I am not encountering in my local site. But in general, with everything else that I am experiencing in my Astro site, everything else has been beautiful, other than just some random small CSS nuances that may have to do with potentially with slots and CSS architecture if you are getting either potentially too elegant or trying to work with Astro slots. So once I figure that out, I will have to write a blog post about that part. Anyhow, I'm going to get back to the presentation, and we will figure that part out instead. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay. So converting this site felt like I was doing everything everywhere all at once. It felt like such a big challenge. And there still are some components that I have to port over, like my complex, I have a complex card that I have still to port over. I have some custom MDX components to port over. In particular, I have one component in one of my MDX articles that uses React Live and a display box. And it does not play nicely with custom components yet. So I am solving that issue hopefully soon. I need to figure out why it's not working well yet, because it's an MDX issue and it's an MDX version 2 issue. So I would hopefully solve that soon, because that would be awesome if that would work in Astro. I would be very excited if I can get that to work. However, that said, I do want to thank a huge amount of the Astro team, especially these particular people on the Astro team, that the core team and the community that worked with me through my site conversion, namely Bryce Guy, Elian, Erica, Kevin, Otterlord, Sarah, 11-918, Tony Sull, and Jan. They were clutch for me when I was working through my conversion. They answered so many questions for me, and they are making this product amazing. So thank y'all. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this presentation and check out Astro. I think if you want to have something like a lean site to try out something new and use less JavaScript, this is something you'd want to take a look at further. Thank you.
Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed your presentation about how you migrated from Gatsby to Astro. My own site, my own personal site is a Astro site, and I had it in 11D beforehand, and I can relate to a lot of the pains of doing transitions from one framework to another. But I think I agree with you that Astro is a pretty darn good platform for having static sites, personal blogs, things like that. Digital guarding is really easy. And after I made my transition, it was a lot easier to keep adding new things, where before I definitely gotten stuck on some dependencies. I couldn't upgrade anymore. Things would break. So this was great. Thank you. Where can people learn more about you?
Well, you can learn more. There's a few places. Well, it will be KathleenMcMahon.dev. I've got to start posting more. Resource 11 on Twitter. I post photos on Instagram, and I got to start posting on KathleenMcMahon.dev. And I'll just start posting more rants.
That is another thing I can relate to with digital guardians, is actually writing on them. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time. Everyone watching on YouTube, thanks for joining us. Leave any questions you have in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. One more time, that's thisdot.co.